You thought that when they walked away in silence, smiling and pretending to be fine, they had defeated you one last time? The truth is exactly the opposite. The very moment you stopped giving, stopped comforting them, stopped being the mirror that reflected the perfection they always needed to see, was the moment their entire inner world began to collapse, without anyone noticing. There were no midnight tears, no sincere apologies, no moment when they fell to their knees and admitted their mistakes the way you once hoped they would. But do not mistake that silence for peace, because behind closed doors, a panic they cannot even name is quietly eating away at every layer of the facade they spent so many years building. Today, we are not going to talk about your pain anymore, because you have become strong enough to move beyond it. We are going to enter a place they themselves are terrified to face, themselves, when there is no longer anyone standing there to carry their emotions for them. But there is something I have never said directly in a video. I did not create this channel to become famous, not to get millions of views. I created it because I know there are people sitting alone at 2 o'clock in the morning, wondering why they cannot leave, wondering whether perhaps everything was their fault. And I want this to be the place they come to. Not to have all their problems solved, but simply to know that they are not crazy. To know that what they went through was real. But recently, YouTube disabled monetization on this channel. I am still covering every expense required to keep this channel alive entirely on my own, without any source of income from it. I am not telling you this because I want your pity. I am telling you because if this content has ever meant something to you, even if it was only one video, even if it was only one sentence that finally allowed you to breathe a little easier, then this is the moment when I need to ask you for one small thing. Please support me through the link in the description below, whether the amount is small or large. There is no minimum contribution. Every contribution does more than help keep this channel alive. It also gives me the encouragement to know that what I am doing matters, and gives me the strength to keep creating and giving more. Thank you for being here. Now, let's continue. We are going to enter a place they themselves are afraid to face. Themselves. When there is no longer anyone standing there to carry their emotions for them. But before we go deeper into the first part, there is something I want to share specifically with those of you watching this video who still feel tied, even just a little, to the person who walked away or the person you decided to walk away from. Because understanding their psychology is one thing, but truly freeing yourself from the invisible threads that remain is an entirely different journey, one that requires the right tools and a clear path forward. That is why we created the book, No Contact, 30 Days to Find Yourself Again. This book will help you understand why you still feel emotionally attached, identify the triggers that make you want to go back, rebuild trust in yourself, and gradually break free from a painful relationship. Inside, you will find 8 in-depth chapters, practical exercises, and a 30-day recovery plan. If you feel that you need a companion on that journey, the link to get the book is in the description below the video. And now, let us return to the journey inside their mind, beginning with the very moment the mask they have worn for so many years starts to crack. Stage 1. The collapse of the mask. There is a truth no one tells you while you are still inside that relationship. Every lie needs someone to believe in it in order to survive. A mask, no matter how carefully crafted, still needs a hand constantly adjusting it whenever it slips out of place. It needs another pair of eyes looking at it and confirming that it is still intact. Throughout the time you were with them, even though you never realized it, you were those eyes. You were the person who kept their story coherent. Every time they contradicted something they had said the week before, you were the one who filled the gap with trust. Every time their actions failed to match the image they wanted to create, you were the one telling yourself that perhaps you had misunderstood, perhaps they had a reason, perhaps things were not as bad as you thought. What you did not know was that, while doing this, you were functioning like a free maintenance system for a structure that was already rotting from the inside. And now that you have removed your hands from it, there is no one left holding that structure up. This is the first thing that happens after you leave, and it happens so quietly that even they may not recognize it at first. The stories they once told begin colliding with one another. Before, they could tell one version of the truth to you, another version to their family, and yet another version to their friends. And you, as the person closest to them, were the wall preventing those different versions from ever meeting. You were not the person exposing the contradictions. You were the person unintentionally hiding them, simply because you were too busy loving, understanding, and forgiving. But when you are no longer standing in that position, the different versions of their story begin to collide within the very social circle they worked so hard to build. One person hears one thing, someone else hears something different, and gradually, tiny cracks begin spreading into fractures that can no longer be concealed. What makes this especially significant is that they were never prepared for this moment, because in their mind, they have always believed that they were the scriptwriter, the person controlling every development, the ultimate director of the production they call their life. They believed that if they were clever enough, charming enough, persuasive enough, they could reshape any story according to their wishes. They could turn the victim into the guilty one. They could transform reality into whatever version they wanted other people to believe. And for a long time it worked. It worked because you were there, because you were willing to carry responsibility that was never yours, because you repeatedly chose to believe in the best part of them, even when every piece of evidence pointed in the opposite direction. But there is one law no manipulator can overcome. Time does not take the side of deception. Time is the most patient witness, and it never forgets. It does not need you to expose them. It does not need you to say a single word. It does not need you to seek revenge or prove anything. It only needs you to step away from the role of caretaker, and on its own, the machinery of deception will begin tightening around the very person who created it. Have you ever noticed how the people who once admired them the most, the people who once defended them in every conflict, gradually begin keeping their distance? That is not a coincidence. It is the inevitable result of a mask that no longer has anyone maintaining it. The people around them, slowly but eventually, begin noticing the very things that only you once saw from inside the relationship. They begin noticing the inconsistencies in what this person says. They begin noticing how this person somehow becomes the victim in every story, always has a reason to blame someone else, always has a version of reality in which they themselves are never wrong. This is the moment the mask begins cracking in public, not because you did anything, but simply because there is no longer anyone standing behind it to keep it intact. And when the mask begins to crack, what happens next becomes even more revealing. The manipulator, the person who always believed they could control everything, begins to panic in a way they may never have experienced before. Because throughout their life, they have grown accustomed to always having a way to reverse the situation, always having another story to tell, always having another person to persuade. But this time, the truth begins spreading faster than they can construct new explanations. They begin contradicting themselves in front of people they once manipulated with ease. They begin exposing gaps in their stories that you previously filled with patience, understanding, and forgiveness. The important thing to understand here is not the satisfaction of watching someone collapse, because that is not what this is about. What matters is understanding that you do not have to do anything. You do not need to expose them in front of anyone. You do not need to tell your story to the entire world in search of validation. Truth, once there is no one left protecting it from being seen, will find its own way into the light at its own pace. And while that happens, you do not need to be there to witness it. You could be somewhere far away, rebuilding your life, while the structure they spent so many years constructing begins collapsing without you having to touch a single brick. This is the first of the three stages you need to understand about what truly happens after you leave. It is not that they are living some perfect life that you are simply not allowed to see. It is not that they found someone better and immediately forgot you. The truth is that the psychological structure they built to control the narrative around themselves is gradually losing its foundation. And that foundation was your presence. You were the person who was always willing to believe, always willing to overlook, always willing to become the mirror reflecting back a better version of them. When that mirror disappears, they are forced to confront their real reflection, an image they have spent their entire life trying to avoid. Stage 2, the law of the seed. If the first stage is about the collapse of what they built on the outside, then the second stage is about what begins to grow on the inside, and that is where things become truly frightening. There is a principle that has existed across cultures, moral systems, and philosophies of life for thousands of years. Whatever you plant, sooner or later, you will have to harvest. This is not a spiritual curse. It is a psychological law that can be observed in real life. Every time a person chooses manipulation instead of honesty, every time they choose control instead of respect, every time they choose envy and belittling others instead of confronting their own insecurity, they are planting a seed. And throughout all the time you remained beside them, you unknowingly became the soil that absorbed most of those seeds. You absorbed their envy by making yourself smaller so they would not feel threatened. You absorbed their arrogance by giving way in every argument. You absorbed their manipulation by constantly questioning yourself instead of questioning them. But now that soil is gone, and the seeds they planted over so many years no longer have anyone else to absorb them. They begin to grow within their own environment, within their own mind, and this time there is no one standing there to carry the consequences for them. Imagine someone who has become accustomed to always having another person clean up the damage they cause. Every time they say something hurtful, someone forgives them. Every time they break trust, someone rebuilds it. Every time they behave selfishly, someone makes excuses for them in front of others. That person has never truly had to face the direct consequences of their own actions because there has always been a protective layer between them and those consequences. And that protective layer was you. When that layer disappears, every consequence that was once softened, delayed, or hidden begins arriving without anything standing in its way. This is when isolation begins quietly entering their life. And this is not the temporary loneliness that almost everyone experiences after a breakup. This is a much deeper form of isolation because it does not come only from losing one person. It comes from gradually losing the ability to keep anyone in their life for very long. Once their manipulative and selfish behavior is no longer concealed by the patience and tolerance of one person, it begins revealing itself in every other relationship they try to build. The new person they find to fill the emptiness will gradually begin noticing the same things that took you years to recognize. And because that person has not invested the same amount of time, emotion, and hope that you once invested, they will have far fewer reasons to stay and endure what you endured. The cycle of loneliness repeats itself, becoming shorter each time and more emotionally depleted with every repetition. Regret, when it finally arrives, does not come in the way you might imagine. It does not arrive as a tearful moment of awakening. It does not arrive as a sincere confession spoken to their reflection in the mirror. For someone who has spent an entire lifetime avoiding their own emotional wounds, regret rarely appears as clear self-awareness. Instead, it appears as a persistent emptiness they cannot name, a lingering uneasiness that they constantly try to fill with things outside themselves, with work, with new relationships, with validation from strangers. But none of those things can truly reach the root of what they are feeling. They live in a prolonged state of restlessness, always sensing that something is missing, yet never stopping long enough to realize that what they are missing is the ability to form a genuine connection with another human being, an ability they gradually destroyed with their own hands through years of choosing control instead of love. Meanwhile, another process is quietly unfolding, one that no one may have warned you about. While they remain trapped inside the toxic atmosphere they created for themselves, you are entering an entirely different process. You are healing. That process is not easy, and no one has the right to tell you that it should happen quickly or neatly. There will still be days when you remember the rare good moments. There will still be nights when you wonder whether you made the right decision. But the fundamental difference is this: you are moving, even if slowly, toward the light, while they remain trapped inside the same cycle, without the tools necessary to escape it. You have the ability to look back, learn, and grow from what happened because you possess an emotional foundation strong enough to do so. They do not. That foundation never truly existed within them. It was always borrowed from other people, and now there is no one left from whom they can borrow it. This is the law of the seed, operating quietly but undeniably. No curse is required. No punishment from the outside is necessary. All it takes is time and the absence of the person who once carried the consequences for them. That alone is enough for everything they planted to begin returning to the very place from which it came. Stage 3. The ultimate contrast. But if you think the most shocking part of this story is watching them fail, then you still have not reached the heart of it. Because for someone whose entire sense of self-worth is built on validation from other people, failure is not the most frightening thing. The most frightening thing, the thing that truly haunts them and keeps them from sleeping peacefully, is seeing you happy without needing them. Stop for a moment and think about that, because it matters more than you may realize. Throughout the time you were with them, a significant part of how they maintained power was through the belief that you needed them more than they needed you. That without them, you would never be able to find happiness. That you would carry their imprint with you for the rest of your life. That was the story they told themselves so they could continue feeling important, meaningful, and somehow still present in your life, even after they were no longer beside you. And then they see you. Not the version of you from the first days after the breakup, exhausted and wounded. They see the version of you months later, years later, calmer, more confident, more alive than you ever were when you were with them. You laugh naturally, not with the forced smile you once had to practice just to keep the peace. You build new relationships based on respect rather than endurance. You pursue the things you once had to put aside because so much of your time and energy was spent soothing them. And most importantly, you do all of this without needing an apology from them, without needing their validation, without needing them to admit that they were wrong. This is what they were never emotionally prepared to face, because if you remained miserable forever, their story would still have meaning. They would still remain at the center of your life, even if only in a negative way. But if you thrive without them, then the entire story they once believed, that they held the key to your happiness, completely collapses. Your peace becomes living and undeniable evidence that they never truly had control over your destiny in the way they imagined. This is where you need to understand something important. Your flourishing is not an act of revenge, even if it feels like one to them. You are not living well to prove something to them. You are living well because you chose to return your sense of worth to where it always belonged, because you stopped making yourself smaller in order to please someone else, because you learned how to love yourself with the same devotion you once gave to them. And precisely because your flourishing is not driven by revenge, it becomes even more disturbing to them, because they cannot find a way to respond to it. They cannot attack a peace that is not directed at them. They cannot manipulate someone who no longer seeks their approval. All they can do is stand at a distance, watch you live a full life, and wonder why they cannot do the same. This is the greatest punishment that requires no one to deliberately inflict it. It is contrast. While you move forward, carrying the lessons with you and becoming more grounded with each passing day, they remain in the same place, repeating the same patterns with different people, searching for the same kind of emotional supply elsewhere, never truly progressing because they have never been willing to stop and look within themselves. Their stagnation, when placed beside your growth, creates an ever-widening distance. And that distance becomes the clearest answer to the question of who truly won in this story. This is also where you need to recognize the most important truth in this entire journey. You never needed to wait for them to awaken before beginning to live your own life. Their awakening, if it ever happens, is not something you need in order to keep moving forward. You already had everything you needed from the very moment you chose to step out of that darkness. From the moment you chose to believe in your own worth more than you believed the things they once said about you. The hell they may be experiencing is not something you created, nor is it something you need to keep watching in order to feel comforted. It is simply the natural consequence of a person choosing to build their life around other people instead of building a stable foundation within themselves. And you chose the harder but healthier path, the path of learning how to stand firmly on your own feet. And that is the real victory. Quiet, needing no recognition, yet stronger and more complete than anything they could ever have given you. There is one truth you need to carry with you after everything we have just gone through. The greatest victory in this story was never about watching them collapse. If you are still waiting for that moment in order to feel relieved, to feel vindicated, then without realizing it, you are still giving them a place in your mind, even if that place is only reserved for someone you believe deserves to be punished. The deeper truth is far more important. Real victory is the moment you realize that whether they collapse or not, whether they regret what they did or continue living in denial for the rest of their life, none of it has the power to determine anything about your journey anymore. Your destiny was never in their hands, even during the years when you believed it was. They do not hold the key to your happiness. They do not get to decide how worthy you are of love, how worthy you are of respect, or how deserving you are of a peaceful life. All of those things belong to you from the very beginning. There was simply a period of time when you forgot, because you placed too much trust in someone who did not have the capacity to protect it. And now that you have taken back what was always yours, nothing they do, nothing they say, and no version of the story they tell other people can stop the path that lies ahead of you. You do not need to prove anything to them. You do not need them to awaken, to feel remorse, or to come back and apologize before you allow yourself to live fully. Your healing should never depend on any action from them, because if it does, then you are giving them one final form of control over your life at the very moment you believe you have finally become free. Let their hell, if it exists, remain their story. A story you do not need to follow. A story you do not need to verify. A story you do not need to follow. Your part in this story ended the day you walked through that door and left. Everything that comes after belongs to them, and to them alone. What you truly need to do now is not look back to see whether they are suffering. What you need to do is keep moving forward, build beautiful things, nurture relationships based on respect, and learn how to become the protector of your own heart, the kind of protection you should always have received from others, instead of having to carry everything alone for so long. If you have reached these final words and you recognize that you are choosing healing instead of feeding hatred, leave a heart in the comments below. not to prove anything to anyone, but simply to mark this moment, the moment you officially acknowledge to yourself that you have already won, even if no one else was there to witness it.